In the Black Hills of South Dakota, majestic figures of George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Theodore Roosevelt, and Abraham Lincoln are said to tell the story of the birth, growth, development, and preservation of this country. But how much do you know about Mount Rushmore National Memorial? I'd venture to guess that most people can name those 4 presidents and can tell you where it is, but do you know the history behind it? Even if you think you know the basics, if you've been there, you've watched the video, you know the whole story, there's a whole lot more that may knock your socks off. I'm Jason Epperson, and this is Parkography. Minnesota farmer Doane Robinson became disillusioned with the life of tending to crops and thought he'd try his hand at being a lawyer. Needing a place to practice, he headed for the Dakotas. But it was really books he loved, and a second career change found him digging into history, eventually being appointed the job of South Dakota's state historian. He wrote about and recorded the events of the state as well as biographies of important people. And at the time, tourism to the Black Hills region was already booming. An island of dark evergreen mountains and gray stone, the Black Hills rise out of nowhere at the edge of the vast Dakota prairie, and were nearly as popular at the turn of the 20th century as they are today. Robinson wasn't convinced that nature was enough, though, and concocted an idea to draw even more tourism dollars to his state. He wanted to do something big. The towering spire rock formations, known as the Needles that pepper the Black Hills, looked to him a bit like people. And inspired by a massive rock carving in Georgia, he thought that many of the needles could be carved into the likenesses of famous Western figures like Buffalo Bill and Lewis and Clark. But hold on a minute. I don't think we can gloss over so quickly the inspiration for Doane Robinson's wild idea. That massive rock carving in Georgia is called Stone Mountain. You're probably familiar with it. It's the largest bas-relief sculpture in the world. So sure, it's impressive, but it depicts 3 different American figures: Jefferson Davis, Robert E. Lee, and Stonewall Jackson. It's a monument celebrating the Confederacy. And even if you hold the belief that revering Southern Civil War figures is an important piece of history, Stone Mountain is a bit more than that. It's the site of the founding of the Second Ku Klux Klan in 1915. It was purchased by the state of Georgia in 1958, which opened Stone Mountain Park on April 14, 1965, in the middle of the Civil Rights Movement, proudly marking the 100th anniversary of Abraham Lincoln's assassination. I just thought that might be important to note. Back to Doane Robinson's unique idea to sculpt Western figures on the Needles of the Black Hills. In 1923, Robinson wrote to one of America's best sculptors, Lorado Taft. Taft sculpted seminal works as part of the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, as well as a likeness of George Washington at the University of Washington in Seattle and Defense of the Flag in Jackson, Michigan. Not only was he a well-known sculptor, he was a patriotic one. His works mostly documented American history, making him perfect for Robinson's spires. Unfortunately, Taft was ill, so Robinson tapped another sculptor, Gutzon Borglum. The son of Danish immigrants, Gutzon Borglum was born in 1867 in St. Charles, in what was then Idaho Territory. A child of Mormon polygamy, his father was married to a pair of sisters, Christina and Ida. After a brief stint at St. Mary's College, Borglum relocated to Omaha, where he apprenticed in a machine shop and graduated from Creighton Preparatory School. Inspired by his younger brother, he developed an interest in sculpture and went to Los Angeles to study the art. In 1889, Gutzon Borglum married one of his mentors, Elizabeth Janes, who was 19 years older. The Borglums spent the next 10 years studying and exhibiting in Europe, where they became acquainted with Rodin and learned from his impressionistic, light-catching surfaces. Borglum's works were accepted into the 1891 and 1892 Paris salons. After moving back to California, the Borglums went to England to study together again, where marital troubles led to their separation in 1903 and divorce a few years later. By now, Gutzon Borglum had sculpted saints and apostles for the new Cathedral of St. John the Divine. He had a group sculpture accepted to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the first sculpture by a living American the museum had ever purchased. He also won the Logan Medal of the Arts in 1909. He'd then marry a second time to Mary Montgomery Williams, with whom he had 3 children. In 1925, the sculptor moved to Texas to work on a commissioned monument to cowboy trail drivers. He completed the model in 1925, but due to lack of funds, it wasn't cast until 1940 at a fourth of its planned size. Gutzon Borglum was obsessed with large scale. He crafted a massive head of Abraham Lincoln carved from a 6-ton block of marble, which was exhibited in Theodore Roosevelt's White House and can be found in the U.S. Capitol crypt in Washington, D.C. But in addition to scale, Borglum was obsessed with patriotism and nationalism. He looked to create art that he said was American, drawn from American sources and memorializing American achievement. And his temperament was perfect for the competitive environment surrounding the contracts for public buildings and monuments. So Gutzon Borglum may have been even more ideal for Doane Robinson's plans for South Dakota than Laredo Taft was. Borglum met Robinson and agreed to the project, but suggested that the subjects be national figures instead of Western ones, such as George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. That's the backstory of Gutzon Borglum that you'll get in most quick histories, or even if you visit Mount Rushmore. What you may not hear about is why he was available to drop everything and go visit Doane Robinson in South Dakota to work on a project that would surely last decades. Gutzon Borglum had just abandoned the Stone Mountain project. He had been commissioned to do the carving, but infighting among backers and stalled fundraising halted the project mid-construction. Borglum had been closely associated with the organization promoting the monument, including leaders of the Ku Klux Klan, who were deeply involved in the project. While historians debate whether he was ever formally a member of the Klan himself, Borglum was clearly connected to the movement during that period and wrote several deeply racist remarks in private letters. When Robinson approached Borglum, it enraged the Stone Mountain backers. Borglum destroyed several of his models for the project and fled to North Carolina amid a growing dispute with those backing Stone Mountain. On Borglum's second visit in 1925, he announced that he would not carve the spires of the Needles as they weren't quite big enough, nor was the rock suitable. He would instead find an appropriate large, solid mountain to carve instead, and eventually landed on Mount Rushmore. Originally known to the Lakota as the Six Grandfathers, the site was renamed after Charles E. Rushmore, a New York lawyer during an expedition in 1885. After Borglum decided on Rushmore, Robinson, then 69 years old, joined a party scaling the mountain with Senator Peter Norbeck. The two would work to shepherd the project, with Robinson in charge of managing the headstrong Borglum. As the Six Grandfathers, the mountain was part of the route that Lakota leader Black Elk took in a spiritual journey that culminated at Black Elk Peak. Following a series of military campaigns from 1876 to 1878, the U.S. asserted control over the area, a claim that's still disputed today, since the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868 granted the Lakota a 60 million acre region encompassing all of South Dakota west of the Missouri River, including the Black Hills. Clearly, that didn't hold up. Mount Rushmore, with its faces of men who may have been great figures of American history, but who all perpetrated controversial, to say the least, actions towards indigenous people, now faces directly toward a tiny Lakota reservation to the southeast, all that remains of what was supposed to be theirs. Native Americans, of course, did rally against the idea of the monument back then, but so did a whole lot of other South Dakotans. In order to encourage some public excitement, before sculpting began, Gutzon Borglum decided to hold a ceremony, a spectacle, dedicating the monument. He wired to Doane Robinson, "Shall bring some costumes for ceremonies. Can you get a few real Indians for spectators?" But on the planned day of the ceremony, Borglum didn't show. Robinson wired, "Borglum did not arrive. Do you know his plans? Spectators and Indians, hard to hold." The ceremony was rescheduled. At it, Robinson spoke to the crowd. Americans stand uncovered in humility and reverence before the majesty of this mighty mountain. But Borglum, Robinson, and Norbeck hadn't raised enough funding to begin the project. It was supposed to be privately funded, and even with Borglum telling locals that South Dakotans would not shoulder the brunt of the financing, it ended up being a national memorial, so they did, however, pay for it, even if voluntarily. In 1929, President Calvin Coolidge signed a bill giving appropriations to Rushmore and creating a commission to oversee the project. The Mount Rushmore National Memorial Commission was led by a dozen important men, but left behind was Doane Robinson. He was heartbroken. Later in the year, a Mount Rushmore National Memorial Society was formed to solicit additional funds, and Robinson was put in charge of the effort, which still exists today, running much of what is the memorial. He retired as state historian and once again became a farmer. On October 4th, 1927, sculpting began, based on a model created by Borglum and overseen by him. Nearly 400 men and women had to endure conditions that varied from blazing hot to bitterly cold and windy. Each day they climbed 700 stairs to the top of the mountain to punch in on the time clock. Then 3/8-inch thick steel cables lowered them over the front of the 500-foot face of the mountain in a bosun's chair. Kind of looks like a modern-day playground swing. Some of the workers admitted to being quite uneasy with heights, but times were tough and any job was good. The work was dangerous. 90% of the mountain was carved using dynamite. The powder men would cut and set charges of specific sizes to remove precise amounts of rock. Before the charges could be set off, the workers would have to be cleared from the mountain. Workers in the winch house on top of the mountain would hand crank the winches to raise and lower the drillers. If they went too fast, the drillers in the bosun's chairs would be dragged up their faces. To keep this from happening, young boys were hired as call boys. Call boys sat at the edge of the mountain and shouted messages back and forth like a fire brigade to help ensure safety. During the 14 years of construction, not one fatality occurred. Dynamite was utilized only until 3 to 6 inches of rock was left to remove to get to the final carving surface. At this point, the drillers and assistant carvers would drill holes into the granite every couple of inches in a process called honeycombing. The holes would weaken the granite so it could be removed, often by hand and chisel. After the honeycombing, the workers smoothed the surface of the faces with a hand facer or bumper tool, evening up the granite and creating a surface as smooth as a sidewalk. Originally, 3 men were chosen to be depicted on Rushmore: Washington, Jefferson, and Lincoln. Undoubtedly 3 of our most famous presidents. Washington was a founding father and the first president, an obvious choice. Jefferson, the author of the Declaration of Independence, and the man responsible for the country's expansion via the Louisiana Purchase. And Lincoln was Borglum's favorite president. Not so much for ending slavery, but for keeping the country together during the Civil War. They were to be depicted to their waists, as if their massive bodies were walking among giants. Jefferson would be to the left of Washington and Lincoln to the right. And to the right of all 3 presidents would be an entablature in the shape of the Louisiana Purchase, commemorating in 8-foot-tall gilded letters the Declaration of Independence, the U.S. Constitution, the Louisiana Purchase, and 7 other territorial acquisitions. It was a bit messy. After work on Jefferson had begun, the rock was found to be unsuitable, so it was blown up and a new figure was sculpted on the other side of Washington. Lincoln was moved to the location that was supposed to show the entablature, leaving a giant gap between Jefferson and Lincoln, enough room to add a 4th president, Theodore Roosevelt. Borglum chose Roosevelt to represent the development of the United States. Roosevelt was a great president and an instrumental figure in the creating of national parks, so I'm a fan. But the man had just died. What about James Madison or John Adams? Well, Borglum knew Roosevelt personally and worked on his campaign for president, and that's why he's up there. In today's eyes, through the lens of history, Roosevelt might seem like a decent choice, but at the time, he absolutely wasn't. In 1933, the National Park Service took Mount Rushmore under its wing. A tram was upgraded so it could reach the top for the ease of the workers. No more 700 stairs before you punch in on the clock. On July 4th, 1930, Washington's face had been completed and was dedicated. The face of Thomas Jefferson was dedicated 2 years later, attended to by President Franklin D. Roosevelt. The face of Abraham Lincoln was dedicated on September 17, 1937, and that year, a bill was introduced in Congress to add the head of women's rights leader Susan B. Anthony, but it didn't provide any funding. In 1939, the face of Theodore Roosevelt was dedicated, but the sculpture was far from finished. First of all, it was just the heads, not the rest of their bodies, and Borglum had planned to make a secret room behind the hairline of Abraham Lincoln, intended to hold some of America's most treasured documents, and had begun blasting a tunnel 70 feet deep. But he didn't really ask anybody. When Congress found out about it, they weren't so crazy about the idea of sending the Declaration of Independence to the middle of South Dakota, or any time or money being spent on this part of the project at all, especially since work was behind schedule. Borglum focused back on the presidents until he died from an embolism in March of 1941. His son Lincoln continued the project for a short time, but insufficient funding and a lack of stable rock forced the carving to end. Mount Rushmore is unfinished. The entablature would not be created, the secret room would not be finished, and most notably, the busts would not be carved to their waists. Carving ended on Halloween, 1941. In a small canyon behind the carved faces sits that secret chamber. Borglum's idea of a place to store our most treasured documents was probably never ever going to happen. But in 1998, a repository was placed into his Hall of Records with 16 porcelain enamel panels containing the text of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, biographies of the 4 presidents and Borglum, and a brief history of the United States. So if we get wiped out and aliens find Earth in 10,000 years, they'll know what to know. Doane Robinson lived to see the completion of Mount Rushmore, having said, "South Dakota has already forgotten that I ever had anything to do with the matter." There's a lot of sordid history to Mount Rushmore, and it may be important to note that the second KKK that had only just formed when Gutzon Borglum was involved would, yes, later go on to perform terrible acts, but it hadn't yet. Borglum would later distance himself from the organization, though historians do debate how sincere that break truly was. Regardless, Gutzon Borglum believed that massive sculptures like Rushmore were not the work of an artist, that they belonged to the people. And Rushmore is there, for goodness sake. It's not like we can argue about whether it should have been built today. It exists, and even knowing the complicated history of the sculpture, it can still be a rewarding experience to visit, especially if you focus on the accomplishments of the 400 men and women who crafted it, and the commonality of the American experience that the memorial intends to reflect. Just over 2 million people a year visit Mount Rushmore. It's a really popular and often crowded place. There's plenty of parking. A big parking garage is $10 per vehicle, $5 for seniors, and free for active duty military. There's no discount with your national park passes. If you're heading to Rushmore in the busy season, arrive early to avoid the heaviest crowds. I highly recommend you take Iron Mountain Road from Custer State Park, as it impossibly winds through the Black Hills until Mount Rushmore is perfectly framed in one of its tunnels. That was Senator Peter Norbeck's idea. When you exit the parking garage, instead of walking down the main walkway with the flags and the gift shops and the ice cream vendors, take an immediate right and head over to the entrance to the nature trail. This very short paved walk will take you to the historic viewpoint called the Borglum View Terrace, where you can see the sculpture framed in trees with very few people and very few distractions. Then follow the path to the left where it exits near the visitor center. You can see the park film and the museum honoring the creation of the memorial. It's really great. And then after the visitor center, take the half-mile presidential trail as it gets you to the closest possible views of the sculpture, and again, fewer people right at the base of the pile of blasted stone that serves as a pedestal for the presidents. You then can take a trail around to the studio, a preservation of Gutzon Borglum's workspace, where he resculpted the face of the mountain over and over to fit the changing needs of the rock. Thanks so much for being here. Please subscribe if you got something out of this episode, and we'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.